Thank you so much, Reena, for agreeing to speak at the summit. Reena is an old holistic occupational therapist and the founder of Khushi Therapy Center based in Mumbai. She believes that the mind and body are connected and she sees challenges from a whole person perspective. She combines complementary therapies and integral health techniques in her practice of occupational therapy to help her clients at a deeper level. She believes balance is an integral part of wellness and that alignment of body and mind and spirit is the key to helping ourselves and our kids. She works with neurodiverse kids and their families since the last 20 years. She's also an author of two books, Little Parenting Guru, which happens to be an Amazon bestseller, and Looking Beyond Labels, Becoming a Mindful Parent. Her strength lies in blending her role as a parent and a therapist to offer the best practical strategies to support families who become uh, who come to her for occupational therapy. Thank you so much, Reena. Over to you for the presentation.
Hi, friends. Um, Thank you so much to Madhvi for asking me to speak about occupational therapy. It's an honor and a privilege. And I'm Reena Singh. I'm an occupational therapist. I have been working as an occupational therapist for the last 20 years. We, as occupational therapists, are so first I would like to tell you what is occupational therapy. So every time the word occupation seems to be like a little confusing for people. The word occupation in occupational therapy refers to the occupations that we engage in in day-to-day living. It could be any occupation. So it could be self-help skills. Self-help skills include eating, dressing, grooming, bathing, any of those kinds of self-help skills. It could involve, for a child, play and leisure skills. For an adult and individual, it would involve a lot of emotional relationship. So a lot of occupations that we engage in on a day-to-day basis. And occupational therapy or occupational therapists help a person to participate in those occupations in a very uh, in the most, what you say, in the best of way that is possible. Now we as occupational therapists, we are trained in all in the body and the mind. So we learned anatomy, we learned physiology, we learned a lot of stuff that was to do with the body. But along with it, we also learned about mental health, about emotional well-being. So I love occupational therapy because it's a beautiful blend of an art of how we use therapy and science. It's a combination, it's a beautiful blend of the two, where we are working holistically with people. So that's what occupational therapists do. Madhvi, 1 minute, you could edit this. I'll open this PPT and I'll just go through that. Yeah. So what is it? So OT, when we are doing occupational therapy, it's about making a difference in the life of the individual. It could be anything. And the profession of most people who are occupational therapists, we can work in various setups. I have friends who are occupational therapists who work in ortho, which means joint pains, back aches, or those kinds of conditions. People can work in geriatrics, which means in older age populations, pediatrics, which means with kids. So as we it's a very what you say, it's a very diverse field, and people specialize in whatever that they feel aligns with them. So it's a massive diversity, and we get to support people in their occupation, in their day-to-day function. So that's occupational therapy. Coming to occupational therapists for children, because that's what I always worked with. As when I passed as an occupational therapist, I started working with children from day one. And when we work with children, we can work in a very varying, what you call, diagnosis. The child may have autism, or the child may have ADHD, that is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It could be cerebral palsy. It could be syndromes, it could be a Fragile X syndrome or a Prader-Willi syndrome or a muscular dystrophy. So as occupational therapists, we work with kids who have difficulties. These are the diagnoses. When I say difficulties, it means it could be difficulties with their, as I said, self-help skills. So it could be if a child has a difficulty with eating or dressing or grooming. So that is where we do come into the picture. The other role of a student or a child is to play. So when I feel, or not just I'm talking on behalf as an OT. So when an occupational therapist sees that the play is not happening, the way, a child is not able to play with the other peers of his age, interact with them, understand the rules of game. So if that role is not, what you say, if that role is not being fulfilled, then we come into the picture and we understand, we try to evaluate what is it that's coming in the way of that particular occupation for a child. So we spoke about self-help skills, we spoke about play, and the other role of a child is that of a student. So student meaning it would be, it involves so many skills: to be able to sit at one place, to be able to focus, to be able to pay attention, to be able to, write, to be able to read, to be able to copy from a board. So in any of these areas, if the child is not able to fit, that's again where we come into the picture. So I'll talk more about these, but the fact is, if the child has a difficulty in any of these occupations, in the self-help skills, in the role of play, or in the role of studying and learning, then we do play a big part in that. Now, I think it's a very great initiative what Madhvi is doing, because, many a times when we are working with parents, it's like a huge caseload. We have so many kids, so we don't really have the time to explain in details about what is it that we do. So as I told you, we work from newborn, like very little kids who are in the NICU till old age. So it's like a big spectrum that we work with. And as I told you, we work with various diagnoses. Now, as a pediatric OT, everyone, as a pediatric meaning when we work with kids. So some people specialize in sensory integration, some people specialize in, they do a lot of auditory intervention, some people would do a lot of primitive reflex work, and there are some who blend, So we start as an occupational therapist, and as a part of a continuing education program, we equip ourselves with various sources of knowledge which help us to enhance the kind of quality that we offer to parents. Now, any pediatric occupational therapist would work they would either have a private practice, like I have my private practice, or they can have their center, or they work as a part of a multidisciplinary team. There are big centers and OTs are a part of that team. So it could be that they have their own private clinic, they can work in a center. I know of a lot of my friends who work in schools, and as a part of my work also, I do visit a lot of schools when the kids who I work with are not able to sit in the class or pay attention. So the places that we work could be any of these, and you would find occupational therapists there. Now, I feel the main work and the I mean, there are many things, but I love one main bit, and that's called task analysis. That's a part of occupational therapy, which means we look at the activity and we try to understand which are the subcomponents which are required to do a task. I'll explain this with an example. So if suppose the child is not able to sit and pay attention in a classroom, okay, so then as an occupational therapist, our role would be to understand whether, first is to do a task analysis. So if he's not able to sit at a place, then what are the skills that are required to be able to sit? The child needs to have sitting tolerance. The child needs to be motivated. The child needs to have the skill, he needs to know how to learn or to read or to even learn follow instructions, to be able to listen, to be able to filter out information. So there's a lot of skills that are needed to be able to sit at one place and to learn. And if the child is not able to do that for some reason, then we try, one is we analyze the skills that are needed. Then we also try to understand whether it is the child who needs to be equipped with the skills, you know, because there could be some skills that developmentally he's not at par with. So we help them and we equip them through therapy so that they learn those skills. And while the skills are being learned by the child, we also work on working in the environment. What are the things that can be changed in the environment? And along with it, we are also working on the teacher or the, you know, whosoever is the person who is going to support the child in that kind of a setup. So if it is a school setup, we train and we educate the teacher on how to help the child. Okay, so that's what we are working on. So basically we do a lot of task analysis, which gives us a unique ability to problem solve, and it gives us a whole picture in our mind. We don't just work with the brain, we work with the body too. But when I say brain, it means we are trying to understand, when a child comes to us, we are evaluating and checking. There could be a standardized testing that many occupational therapists do, and there are informal assessments. So standardized testing, meaning we check, you know, what is the visual perceptual age, what is the writing age, what are the where are the fine motor skills. Fine motor is anything that a child does with his fingers. What is the gross motor age? Is he able to jump? Is he able to climb? Is he able to do a lot of those tasks? So we are checking for gross motor skills, we are checking for fine motor skills, so, and visual perceptual skills, attention. So those are the kinds of standardized testing which some occupational therapists would be doing. And then there are what you call informal assessments. You know, how does the child enter? Is he listening to my instructions that I'm giving? Is he not able to listen to those instructions? So there's a complete analysis that happens while we work with a child. Now, it's also important to understand that, you know, sometimes we're working and helping the child. Sometimes we're working with the environment, as I said, but sometimes rather most of the times, it's important that we are also working on ourselves. We are using ourselves therapeutically, you know, and when I say we are using ourselves therapeutically, it means that how are we talking to the child? Are we too loud? Are we too soft? Are we very excited? Are we very animated? So we're checking a lot of those kinds of things also while we are doing the assessment. Madhvi, just give me 1 minute, huh, Madhvi? I'll just pause here for a while, just 1 second. I don't want
Yeah,
that.
no worries.
I'm 1 second. Huh? Thank you so much. Yeah, Madhvi, I'm back. I'm sorry. You know, I had my son in the front and he was playing with his mouse and clicking away. You know, it was like really distracting me. I told him to go out. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Yeah. All right. So I was talking about task analysis. Yeah. So now let me start so you can edit it well. So now I spoke that we can work with the child, we can work with the environment, and it's very important that I use myself more therapeutically. Am I more present with the child? Am I more excited when I'm with the child? Am I speaking very softly? Am I speaking very loudly? So, you know, it's important. If the child is like really very dull and not very excited, then I may have to speak nice and loud and be excited. But if the child is like very excited, I may have to talk softly and I may have to go a little slow, the speed of my speech, so all of those also impact a lot. So these are all the kinds of things that we are evaluating on a constant, like a minute to minute level. So when a child is with us in a therapy session, we are evaluating what is affecting the child. Is it me? Is it environment? Is it the skills within the child which he is not able to do well? I will be explaining more of these with examples, but right now I just wanted you to get a brief idea about what is it that we do. The aim is to ensure that we are getting the child to be actively involved in the therapy session, or in the classroom setup, or at home, wherever that the child is, or the individual is. It's not always a child. I work with a lot of young adults, so the aim is that they are participating, they are engaging, they are motivated, and they get to feel that they can do it, so it's really, really important. I'll give you an example. I remember working with a child and I was teaching him how to do a forward jump. We keep a ladder on the floor, or we just draw like, squares or boxes. And I was teaching this child that he has to jump from one rung to the other. Okay, just jump, 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 like a forward jump. Now, I saw that this boy was able to do it while he was jumping. And I stopped, like first I held his hands and I thought he needed my support. So then I realized, no, he can do it by himself. So we are constantly assessing, right? Oh, does it now? He doesn't need my support. So I just held one hand and I said, come on, let's jump. And he did jump. Then, I just held on to his finger. So we are reducing the prompt very gradually, and then he could still jump. And then I took my hands away and I saw this child holding himself like this, like how I was holding his finger, and he was jumping. So he just needed some kind of a prompt. He just wanted to feel that he can do it. And this holding his own t-shirt made him feel that. So it's just about assessing the child, the environment, and assessing myself, whether I'm using myself as a therapeutic tool. So that's what any occupational therapist would do constantly. Now, how do we practice? When we pass occupational therapy, I'm talking about India, we have an All India Occupational Therapy Association, which we need to be a part of. So we have to become a member of that is one. And I practice in Maharashtra. So there are certain states and we have a councils, and council is like a regulatory body. So all practicing occupational therapists are registered with the council. And so that's how we need to be registered. If I talk about myself, I have mainly worked with kids. I remember working from June 23rd, 2000 till today. By God's grace, it's been a beautiful journey, not just helping the kids, but as a lot of growth and evolution. Because, when I started working, I was a therapist, then I became a parent. And then when I had my own child, the skills that I had as a therapist helped me to become a better parent too. So now when I work with kids, it's a beautiful blend of a therapist and a parental perspective. And it's amazing, it's really amazing. So it's a fulfilling, beautiful occupation to details about how do we help kids. So as I told you, most therapists, occupational therapists, would help a child to be in that occupational role of a student. So if that role involves going to a school and helping them sit, so we are required to go into a school setup. I would give you an example. So I was called to a school, and it's like many, many, many examples. It's just to help you understand what do we do. So if I go to a school and if the child is not able to sit, we understand in the classroom, what is the position of the child? Are there any things in the environment that are disturbing the child and that are competing, they are like distracting the child and the child is not able to focus. So those are the kinds of things that we are checking in the environment. Then we talk to the special educator or the counselor and we suggest what kind of movement activities can be done, how often they should be done, depending on the individual child. So that is how we work with the child. And it's beautiful when when the counselor tells us, you know, this child is not able to, like I worked with a child, and the counselor just said, you know, if I leave this child on the ground floor, he can't go to the class, to his own class on the second floor. He forgets that he has to go to his class. Or when everybody is told, okay, everyone, come on, close your tiffins, put them into your bag, now take out your maths textbook or whatever, he's not able to follow instructions. So these are the kinds of scenarios that are brought up by the counselor or by the special educator, and we help them understand why is the child not able to do it, while we are working at the therapy center, equipping the child and helping them to develop those skills by which he would be able to do those tasks which are required of this child in a classroom. So these are the kinds of things. Okay, there are another set of things, you know, there are many of my kids with whom we work, and you know, the concept of hidden rules. When I say hidden rules, it's like, you know, in a class, we are not supposed to suddenly stand up and jump or just move around, or you know, like we are supposed to follow instructions. When everybody is being told to sit, we are supposed to sit. So these are rules which are not told all the time, that you have to listen to your teacher and you have to focus, you have to complete your work. So when we see that a child is not able to follow those hidden rules, he's not able to sit at his place, not able to focus, does not have that impulse control, you know, suddenly starts jumping, suddenly starts looking out of the window, gets distracted, when he's told go and sit at your place, does not follow. So these are the kinds of things that we see in the classroom setup, and we try to understand what is coming in the way of not letting the child pay attention, you know. So that's what we work upon. It could be a sensory issue also, you know, it could be, so it could be a whole lot of things. It could be a sensory issue also, where I remember working, you know, I worked with one boy, and this boy would tell me, auntie, whenever this my, you know, his the boy who sat next to him on the same bench, whenever he would write, auntie, that sound of that pencil on the paper, i I get distracted by that. So you know, these are some of the things which others find it difficult, but then being an occupational therapist and having that understanding that there are these kinds of sensory issues which may come up, and then accordingly working on those so that he can sit and focus. And till those skills are built, what are the things that we can do, you know, so that these things don't bother the child. So this is the kind of thing that we work with kids. So that's the school setup. I have a lot of kids who need a shadow teacher. Shadow teacher is a teacher who sits next to the child in the class, helps the child to pay attention, focus. When he gets distracted, she would say, you know, she would help the child to do what other kids do in the class. So many occupational therapists are also playing a big role of training the shadow teachers also. I have a lot of people come to us, and we're training them on how to help these kids. So you would see that it's like in the school, helping the shadow teachers, helping the psychologist. And it's not that we are just helping, but we are taking inputs from them too. It's like a bi-directional thing. It's not like, okay, we are the ones who take, it's a teamwork basically. So helping the psychologist understand the perspective from our perspective, you know, like what are the sensory issues that may be coming up, what are the skill deficits, working with the remedial teachers, because sometimes it's like, okay, repeat the same spelling again and again. You know, I have a lot of parents and even educators who tell me, I make him write number 2 10 times, and then I tell him write 3, he still writes 2. If I tell him, and then some educators tell me, we tell the child to write 1 to 10, and he can just write 1 to 10, like, you know, in a sequence. But if the child is told, okay, write number 5, okay, write number 2, he cannot randomly think and write it down. He can do it only in a sequence. So why is that happening is what we explain educators. So they get the understanding and a deeper knowing on why is it that they are finding it difficult to cope. So it's a lot of coordination. We take a lot of feedback, and then usually, at least, you know, the kids that I work with, their educators or their psychologist from the school sends us an email after every 2 or 3 months that, you know, this is where he was and this is where he is. These are the strengths. These are the challenges. And strengths are amazing. We've gained a lot. We would want your help with these particular challenges. So while we assess, we know that what is the immediate need and the requirement in the school, and do we work on those at this point of time. So that's how the work happens. Now, when we occupational therapists are working with kids, we get referrals either from a pediatrician or a developmental pediatrician. So either a pediatric neurologist, they would refer a child to us. That is one of the ways. A lot of kids who I work with, usually it's self-referral. A lot of parents, they come to me and they say, you know what, I feel there is, I feel that the parents have a lot of intuition. They're beautiful, they know it. Things that I've learned over the years, they tell me specifically, madam, he turns like this completely. You know how we turn like a head? He turns his full body. There's something not going right. And I'm like, wow, the kind of observations that parents have are fantastic. They say, I've seen other kids, they can do this. My child is not able to do this, So a lot of kids who come to me are the parents who refer. It's self-referral, so they come and they're very, very clear about, ma'am, they can play, every child can play and take turns, but whenever my child is playing, he wants to only dominate. He doesn't want to listen to others, and if they make him listen to their rules, then he has a tantrum, and there are regular constant meltdowns happening. How can we help? So that's how parents come to me. So there are a lot of things, a lot of ways. So it could be either a pediatrician, developmental pediatrician. I have a lot of referrals from various schools. Schools refer kids to us. So a lot of ways by which people reach us, a lot of information. I have my own YouTube channel and I talk about what is happening. So that's how also we get to know about, that's how people get to know, oh, these are the things and this is what an occupational therapist can help me with. So that is also how people come to us. As I mentioned earlier, there are some standardized tests which are done by, so there are some standardized tests which are done by the therapist, and there are a lot of informal assessments, as I said. And you know what? One thing I believe is it's an ongoing process, meaning we do the assessment and we keep it. But as I gave you an example earlier, if I'm seeing that the child is able to jump in the ladder from one rung to the other, last time he needed 2 hands for support, and in the same session, then later he wanted only 1 hand, and the third time he could hold himself and he could jump, and now he doesn't need all of that. So it's an ongoing assessment, an ongoing challenge that we are constantly adding. It's not like, okay, this is what we work and then after 3 months we change. The goals, the assessment, the evaluation, it's an ongoing thing that we are doing along. We check what is the gap. So if a child comes to me, I met a child parent yesterday and they say, what, madam, my child is 3.5, he should start jumping, he's still not jumping. So what is the problem? So we are usually assessing that what is the age of the child and what is the age, what is the age at which he is for gross motors or for fine motors or for visual perception, or it could be some primitive reflexes that are present which are not letting the child they're not letting the child develop the skills of postural reactions or the future skills that are needed to pay attention. So we are assessing all of those kinds of things. Now, so what do you expect when you go to an occupational therapist? So the first thing is you would be giving your concerns. Okay, if it is the school, they would give me the concerns. Many a times, if it is the school, then it is the parent and the school together. And many a times when we go to the school, I see that it's the class teacher, it's the, the resource staff. It could be the special educator, the counselor, the supervisor, and the head of the resource department and the parent. So we are sitting together and they give me, each one gives us their concern. This is our concern. The counselor would give her concerns, the class teacher would give her concerns. See, in the class he is not able to do that. Educator will say, in my session, when I'm sitting and I'm doing my work, making him do academics, he is not able to do these. So, and the shadow teacher would have their own concerns. Then I do an evaluation, and every occupational therapist has curated. They have their own ways of evaluating. Some are standardized, some are non-standardized. So every OT would have their own way of evaluating, where we check each of these things, you know, how long should the child be able to do a particular activity and how long is he able to do. So I'll just give you a random example. So if a child is at 5 years of age and if he's not able to sit, you know, a parent came to me. Let me finish the earlier one. Child at 5 years of age is able to sit for 9 minutes developmentally. But you know, if a parent comes to me and says, you know, my child is 5 years old, he's not sitting for 30 minutes, he should be sitting. You know, that's something which I wouldn't really take it as a concern. So what I'm saying is I'm seeing the concerns, but I'm trying to understand from a developmental perspective, that is, does this role, you know, does that age of the child meet with what the expectations are? So those are the kinds of things that I would assess. If you know, I had another parent who came to me whose son was 2.5 years old, and she told me that, you know, my child is not writing, he holds the pencil like this, like, you know, I don't have a pencil right now, but instead of using a tripod grasp, he was holding a pencil like this. It's obvious. I mean, if that's what it is, it's at 2.5 years of age, a child is not ready. The fingers are not ready for that tripod grasp. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we understand the concerns, but we try and understand from our evaluation and from the age of the child, whether the concerns are something that needs to be addressed and worked, and the skill needs to be worked on with the child, or is it that the parent needs to be explained and the parent needs to be given more knowledge about what to expect and what to not expect from the child. So those are the kinds of things we do. As I mentioned, we work on fine motor skills, gross motor skills. We work on motor planning. You know, many parents, so what is motor planning? When I tell a lot of kids who come to me, I say, okay, bye, see you. They do bye like this. You know, they're not able to plan to put their hands like this. Or if I'm doing things like, okay, come on, let's put your thumb in and make a fist, the child is not able to do it. If I say, okay, let's do this, let's copy, let's do this, let's do these, they're not able to copy those actions. They are looking at the hand, or they're visually compensating, and then they forget they have another hand. And I say, okay, let's do both hands. And then they're like trying to do it, you know. So that is fine motor planning. If I say, okay, let's jump together, the child is not able to jump, or to jump from a height, or to do any kind of an action. You know, if I do a dance, is the child able to copy that kind of a movement pattern? So that's about motor planning. So we're checking for gross motors, fine motor skills, motor planning problems. Are there any of those? We are also checking for sensory processing issues, which means, as I told you about this child, when the partner would sit and write, the pencil on the paper, that sound would trigger and make the child go into like a, you know, into fight flight response, and he was not able to focus. So we are trying to understand what is the sensory issue that is present, which is interfering with the child not being able to learn. It could be any of those. It could be that the child is not able to sit at one place. So that means, is it vestibular? Is it proprioceptive? Vestibular meaning it's a lot to do with movement. Proprioceptive meaning there are receptors in all of our joints and in the muscles, this muscle spindle, where the child is not getting that joint sense, the position sense. He's not able to grade whether how much pressure to put while writing, how tight to hug, you know, when he's hugging somebody. So that's about proprioception. It could be tactile, where the child is constantly wanting to touch somebody, you know, is that the sensory issue? I have a lot of parents who come to me and they say, you know, madam, whenever the child, whenever somebody is wearing a sari, my child wants to touch the stomach, you know, the bare part, or the child just wants to feel here. So it could be, or the child is constantly wanting. I know of another parent, they say they put spit on their hands and then they want to feel it on a mirror or on a surface. So we are trying to understand, is it vestibular? Is it proprioceptive? Is it tactile? Is it visual? You know, if it is visual, it's like, you know, they go like this or they go like this, you know, like looking through, even if the light is not bright, they find it's called visual stress. So it could be that. And sometimes when the vestibular system is not mature, the child is compensating like this, you know, using a lot of movement in front of the eyes, looking through things which are like these, you know, which have those holes in between the nets and mesh kind of things, or doing this, or looking from the periphery. So when I see those kinds of things, we are trying to understand, is it visual? Is it vestibular? Is it proprioceptive? Is it auditory? As I told you about this boy, that are there some sounds that are disturbing? I also remember working with one child. I was shocked, you know, when I worked with this child's classroom was here, and he would always tell me, Auntie, the sound of flush bothers me. And I thought, I don't know why is he saying that, because so I was called in I went to his school rather. I was in his class, and then there were like 3 other classes next to it. And after that was the toilet. And he said that flush sound bothers him, and the sound of children around was not bothering him. It was very hard for me to even believe that. But then I sent the mother and I said, go and flush. And we actually evaluated, and the child was actually saying the truth. I mean, kids always know it, because sometimes they manipulate, but then that sensitive his system was to the sound of flush. So it could be an auditory issue, it could be some sound. I remember I had my clinic at a place where we had those planes passing like every 15-20 minutes, but in between there used to be this gap. So one boy who was writing, I was doing some task with him, a writing task, and he's like, Auntie, a plane is coming. And I couldn't hear the sound of any plane. He said, Auntie, there's a plane coming. And then after say 10 seconds, I could hear the plane. So it could be an auditory sensitivity, you know. It could be some sounds that they are able to listen to. I'm not able to, I don't get distracted by them. So it could be auditory. It could be taste. It could be just anything into the mouth, you know, that may be disturbing them. And when I say sensory processing, it could be a child who comes to me, parents say, oh, he doesn't eat everything. He's a picky eater. Where, you know, there are some kids, they just look at the food and they want to vomit out. It could be that. So we're trying to understand which is the sense, or which are the senses which are not supporting, and they are making it difficult for the child to pay attention. You know, so as I spoke about this, it could be the smell, any of our sensory systems. We have 8 of them. So I spoke about vestibular, proprioceptive, tactile, visual, auditory, taste, smell, and what else? I think one is missing, auditory, I told you. Yeah, so those are the 8. Interoception. So good. So interoception is interoception, which means it's a sense of it's internal, you know, those receptors are inside. Now, what do I mean by that is it that my stomach is hungry? Is it that my stomach is full, or is it that I'm hungry? That is what my interoceptor is doing. Am I tired, or I am having enough, or I am, I can run around more. Right now, when I'm talking to you, I feel my throat is getting dry. That is also what my interoceptors are telling me. So when my throat is going dry, that is a body state. And then what do? Is I drink water. So, so I have drank water. Oh, my throat feels better now. So what are we doing is we are identifying the body state, and whatever that the information that we get from a body state helps us to take an action. Okay. But with many kids, parents tell me that they're constantly eating, or they're not eating at all. They're constantly what you call, drinking water, lot of water, or there are some who don't drink water at all because they don't get that signal. Toilet and potty also. I have a lot of parents who tell me, he doesn't, in fact, I have a lot of elder boys with whom I work, and they say, Auntie, I get to know that I want to go to the toilet at the last minute, so I have to run. So that's again an interoceptor, which tells you about the body state. So these are all the kinds of things that we are evaluating in the child, helping them with each of those sensory systems, trying to help them out why that system is not working and what can we do so that it can work and help and support the individual in the best possible way. So another thing that I want to mention is about the interoception. So it's a body state. It is also an emotional state, which means I know of this child who is always running. Parents tell me he's always running. He doesn't understand that he's tired because he doesn't get that input. So, then we help the child to understand that your body state, see you're sweating, see your heart is beating so fast. So that's your body state. And we help them to link it with an emotional state, which means when your heart is going fast, when you are sweating, that means you're tired. So that's the linking of the body state and the emotion state. So we work on all those kinds of areas. We also work with handwriting. Kids are not able to write, not able to hold the pencil well, not able to give the adequate amount of pressure, not able to form a letter, not able to learn how to trace a letter. We help them in understanding the position, how to hold a pencil, and how do we reach to that tripod grasp, to that, the dynamic tripod grasp. So a lot of work is done on handwriting also. We work on organizing behavior. Now, what do I mean by that? It means that I worked with a boy and elder boy, and it also applies to younger kids, in a classroom. So if I feel like right now when I'm talking to you, and if I feel, okay, let me do some dance, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to dance. I know that at this point of time, even if that thought comes that I should dance or I should look out, oh, what is that, that's flying out, even if I'm getting distracted, I get myself back and I'm able to focus. So I'm able to organize my behavior. And if the child is not able to organize the behavior, then we do the task analysis, as I told you earlier, to understand which are the skills which are deficient and which are the skills which are his strengths, which we can use to work on those deficit areas so that the child is able to organize his behavior. So that's one of the things. When I say organize behavior, it also means organizing time and space. When I work with elder boys and elder girls, if they have to, most of them come to me with parents, their parents come to me that, he's always on the screen. He's a big boy now. He should know when to study, how much to study. He should know also how to, make a timetable, how we prioritize, our goals on what we need to do, goals or even a day rather. So that is the kind of thing that we help them to do, to learn to organize space and to organize time. And when I say space, it also means for simple, very little kids, where they finished playing and they put their toys everywhere and then they are gone. It's done. They finished playing. Then to train the parent, most of them know it already. But if the child is not able to pick up things and put them back in place, then which are the skills which are lacking? How do we help the child so that he learns to do it by himself? So that's organizing space. And organizing time, meaning if I have to sit here for 1 hour and I have to explain things, how do I prepare myself? How do I do those kinds of things? That's what we help kids to do. Then it is also about how is the child handling that sensory information. If that vestibular input is too much, if that proprioceptive is too much, how is he reacting to that, and whatever way that he's handling that sensory input, is that socially appropriate? Is that if it is not socially appropriate, what is it that we can do at the moment so that he can manage better while we help him and train and build the system so that and the neurological system so that it can handle situation and the external input better. We are also evaluating about primitive reflexes, and to check if they are coming in the way. Many a times, as I spoke about handwriting, there are a lot of hand reflexes. As I told about picky eating, there are a lot of mouth, there are a lot of oral motor, reflexes. And many a times if the child is jumping a lot, there are a lot of foot related reflexes. Sometimes even the defensive reflexes of Moro reflex, and there's another one called fear paralysis reflex, which is again, it's actually an intrauterine reflex, but we're trying to understand which are those reflexes which should not be present, and if you don't know what are primitive reflexes, they are the ones which help us. They are those stereotypes. If a child gets scared, he goes like this, that's a Moro reflex, when a child is just born. But when the child is like 4 months, 5 months of age, if there's a sudden sound, the child may just turn and look. He wouldn't go like this all the time. you know. So over a period of time, those reflexes get inhibited. You know, primitive reflexes are like, if I would say, it's like an onion. You know, if I have the innermost layer of intrauterine reflexes, then I have primitive reflexes, which is the next layer. And when these are inhibited, the intrauterine and the primitive reflexes are inhibited, then I would see the next layer of postural reflexes. You know, being able to sit, if I'm falling, I can correct myself. If I fall this side, I can correct myself. And when I have good writing reactions and postural reflexes, I will be able to pay attention better. So it is also an OT, if they're trained, they're also evaluating primitive reflexes. They are also checking why are the postural reflexes not developing. And to give you an example, how would it manifest as parents would say, he's just clumsy, he keeps falling, he's not looking, he would you know, just constantly banging onto something. When we are falling, we usually hold, you know, we correct ourselves in a, so that's what we do. But with a child, he just falls off. So that supporting reactions have not developed. So we are checking why have they not developed and how are they interfering with the development. A big part of late that we are doing, at least I see a lot of occupational therapists working, is on sleep. Because, you know, sleeping, I mean, it's become the new normal now where parents tell me, yeah, my child, and I'm talking about children who are like 3-year-old, 4-year-old. Yeah, my child sleeps at 12:30, 2:30, 3. And I'm like, oh my God, 3 at night? That's early morning actually. They're like, yeah, it is usually, that's how it is in our house. But then how that sleep, if the child is not sleeping at the right time or not able to fall asleep, or the rhythm has shifted, you know, like with many parents, they're trying that the child goes off to sleep by 9, but the child takes like an hour or 2 hours to fall off to sleep. Then we are evaluating, why is the child not able to fall off to sleep, and we're training parents on how to support that. So it could be the duration, the, you know, how long is the child taking to fall asleep. Is he able to sleep for a continuous like 8-9 hours? Because some kids can sleep on time, but they wake up every 2 hours or 3 hours, you know, or they wake up and then they're not able to fall asleep. So there's a lot of work that we do on sleep training also. So that's another major work. A lot of work on training, potty training, toilet training. How do we do that? Of course, behavior therapy, they do it behaviorally, but I believe, and I'm sure most occupational therapists know, that it's not, you know, it just comes spontaneously. Those things are not taught. We just learn them. And if the child is not getting potty trained, there is some difficulty. And which are those difficulties? And we train and educate parents on how to address them. And when that is addressed, how potty training, toilet training just comes. I mean, I have a lot of parents who send me messages. It may sound funny, but they say, you know what, ma'am, for the first time he sat on the potty seat. Some kids, they just want to stand in one corner, which is their fixed corner. They want to do potty only. They're not on the potty seat. It could be so many reasons for that. So we're helping a parent understand why it is so. In my book, if you see Looking Beyond Labels, Becoming a Mindful Parent, I've spoken about all of these things, about how to train and how to work with all of these areas. Now, it's also very important to understand that when we are working, I mean, this is what I started doing later when I became a parent, because, you know, sitting like this and talking that you do this exercise, you do that exercise, it's very easy. But when I realized that as a parent, if I have to do even 2 exercises or 3 exercises, it's difficult. There are so many things that are already happening throughout the day. So it becomes the role of us to help the parent to prioritize also. I do a lot of emotional well-being workshops where a lot of time I'm teaching the parent to first calm down and to relax, because, you know, and it's usually the mothers. I mean, of course, the fathers are also working, but the primary role of caregiving, you know, the taking care for the child is the mother. So 80-90% people who come to me are the mothers. Fathers are also working, but it's mainly the financial support that is being provided by them. There are exceptions though, but most of the times it's like, you know, mothers who are like really very well educated and doing a great job in their own field. And when there is a difficulty, or the child is having difficulty with any of these areas that I mentioned, to take a sabbatical and to help the child, to fulfill those roles. And it's a big role, to sculpt the body, mind, and the soul of the child. It's a big responsibility. But then every parent and every mother had their own expectations. They worked hard towards becoming who they were. So I see a lot of frustration, I see a lot of anger. So again, an OT would help a lot in helping them with the emotional well-being. I have a lot of mothers who come and they're like burnt out, because sometimes what happens is, earlier it's like frustration, and then it's like they're doing so much for the child that they have nothing for themselves. So an OT also helps them to balance their roles, and not to get over identified with just the role of being a parent, but also that you are an individual and you have your own needs. So it's a lot of that work also that an OT would do with a parent, and fathers, because they're doing a lot of financial support, they're not in the house and they want to give time to their child, and when they're not able to, there's a lot of guilt that I see in fathers. So working with the fathers, helping them to prioritize and to balance, working with the mothers, helping them to prioritize, and then helping the father and the mother to work together as a team, because there's a lot of blame game that happens sometimes. So there's a lot of in-depth work that happens with families. It's a very, I love doing this because it's very holistic. It's not that, okay, you just work with the child, you just work on fine motors, okay, you just work on sensory. No, it's working with the family, it's working with everyone all together. So these are some of the things. Okay, I also, if the child comes and the child has a speech delay, then an occupational therapist would also try and understand, because if the motor planning is poor, then sometimes the oral motor planning, I would say, what happens in the body is what happens in the mouth. So if the child is not able to plan his body, not able to clap, not able to do these kinds of actions or jump or whatever, it becomes difficult for a child to even plan to use his oral motor muscles for speaking, for chewing, for gargling, for spitting. So there's a lot of work that we do with the oral motor reflexes, or a lot of work around the mouth is what we work. And it's a lot of it's like a hand in glove with the speech therapist. So that's another area that we work on. I remember doing a lot of group therapies, even now. Now it's COVID, but it's on a break. But a lot of group therapies with the parents and a lot of group therapies for kids, so that they learn turn taking, waiting, sharing, what to talk, what not to talk, how to stay on topic, inferring, reasoning, problem solving. So there's a lot of work that's done in the group setup also. Working on the core strength, working on balance, working on coordination, eye-hand coordination. So it's like a lot of things, it's so much to talk in 1 hour, but these are some of the things that we work on with the kids. So if the child has, many kids who I have worked with, they had difficulties with articulation, and I'm sure a big role is played by the speech therapist. But many a times, as I told you, articulation could be because the primitive reflexes around the mouth haven't integrated. And when I've worked with kids, just given them 2-3 exercises, and they say, oh wow, my child is able to do this now, my child is able to do that. So that's another area. So there's a lot of value that an OT can add to the child and to the family. And there's so much that I can go on talking about. There's executive functioning, there's thinking, there's decision making. There's a whole lot of stuff that we do. As I told you, OTs, it's about helping the person to stay in their occupation. So when I spoke about a child, and now when I talk about a parent, the occupation of a parent is what? To support the child, to become a good parent, and to support her own self or his own self. So that's again another thing that we work on when we work with a family. So once all this evaluation has been done, we make a report, and that report is given to the parent. And that report has that these are the things that your child is very good at, and these are the things that your child is having difficulty or challenges with. And then the way I work, we call kids to our therapy center once, twice, thrice a week, depending on the child's need. And a home program is given to a parent, which needs to be followed along with when they come to us for therapy. So that's how we do. So home program is given, parent follows up the program, and then we evaluate every 2 to 3 months. Treatment would look very different with every child. You know, I remember working with a child and I was like, we were just playing, you know, the child was bouncing on the ball, and then the child was jumping into the ball pool, and then I was singing and I was like, yeah, wow, that's funny, this, that, and all of it. And the next parent who came in was like, what were you doing with this child? Is that what is occupational therapy? I mean, you were just playing. Were you really giving therapy? And the first thing is, to make the therapy look like play is the skill, and that's why it's an art of therapy. But while we are playing, we are constantly evaluating, okay, so if the child is on the swing, is the child getting overstimulated? Is he getting hyper aroused? So if he's getting hyper aroused, I may give him ball pressure or something, so I get him back to an optimum level of arousal. So it may look like, wow, let's play with ball, okay, let's play with the swing, and let's do this and let's do that. But that is how therapy may look like. Or it could be a conventional therapy where a therapist would sit on a tabletop and make him do puzzles. So it varies from child to child, parent to therapist to therapist. Everyone has their own unique model of working, and every therapist, as they work with kids, they have different experiences. So they're learning different things and they're incorporating all of it into their model. So therapy looks really different. But I feel it's very important to know that we are all always using play as the main role. So play is the major tool by which we are working and connecting with kids, and we're using ourselves therapeutically. That's very important. Do I need to shout right now, or do I need to be softer right now? Do I need to look into the child's eyes? Oh, when I look into the child's eyes, child is feeling the child is retracting, so I need to look away, and then the child feels better. So there's a lot of this constant back and forth that's happening, and towards the end we are explaining the parent about what are we doing, why are we doing what we are doing, and how can they do that particular activity in a different way. And then that progress is shared with the teacher or with the parent if they've come to me, or with the counselor or with the doctor. Most parents who come to me, I also refer them to a developmental pediatrician, because I want to know from that doctor's, a developmental pediatrician's perspective on what are the skills according to that person which are not yet achieved, which should have been achieved. I also want to know, as an occupational therapist, is there something medically that I don't know of which can be done? Because many a times a child has nutritional deficiencies, which are, like if a child has low vitamin D or a calcium or an iron or a zinc, and the child is mouthing a lot, and if I'm just doing exercises around the mouth, it won't help. The doctor may prescribe, supplements. So it's a beautiful, teamwork that we are all doing together. So that's what it is about. And I feel the best therapist is always the parent, because a therapist like us would see a child for an hour, or twice a week or thrice a week. Parents are seeing their children every single day. So the input from a parent is extremely important. It really matters, because that's what I have learned all over the years. And as a parent, if you are listening to it, please trust your intuition, because your feedback is extremely important. Your feedback, your observations help us. Of course, we are also observing, but we are observing differently. And that, if it is combined together, it is amazing combination, and we can really help the child to improve at a beautiful pace. So thank you so much for listening to me for so long. I have tried to cover a lot. I've tried to cramp it all up. But thank you so much for your patience. And I'm happy I'm doing it in this month. 27th October is World Occupational Therapy Day. So I'm doing a little bit in raising awareness about my profession. And it is doing very well. OTs are recognized worldwide. Their support is being seeked out. It's sought after. Everywhere they are in demand. So it's because we are adding value to the life of the families and the kids. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ah,
Was
thank
that
you so
okay?
much. Perfect.
Thank you.
You covered everything.
Yeah.
Such a long presentation.
Hmm.
Talk. So I just wanted to, I have a few questions to add to the, I mean, you have answered, but I wanted again specific answers to these questions. The first one is, at what age does an OT start?
At what age does an OT start?
Yeah, they say, Madhvi,
There's a lag. I can't hear you in between.
uh,
Hello?
yeah, Reena, just a second. I'm trying to, there seems to be some network issue. Yeah, can you hear me now? I just changed the network.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can hear you. Yeah.
So I said a lot of parents who come to our center, they ask me, Madhvi ma'am, our kid is only 14 months old. Is OT required? Can we do OT as young? So I know the answer, but I want to hear from the OT. So what is your take? How young can a child be for occupational therapy?
A child as young as I told you, we work even in the NICU. So it could be as young as 2 months of age, not even 2 months, a newborn child, we work with them also. I haven't worked personally. My youngest child till now was 2 months of age. So I've started working from 2 years of age, and I've always worked with kids, but they can work on for lifelong, it could be any age. So there's nothing like an age, and they call of something called, you can give therapy even if you're in doubt and you feel there's something not going right. It's better to start therapy.
Okay, another thing I wanted to ask is, how do you do OT for, what kind of, sorry, wrong question. What kind of, uh, what do you look for in a child with ADHD? How does OT support a child with ADHD? What are the challenges that children with ADHD face typically? That
So
I know
what
it's hard. I mean, I'm asking you for a
no,
very,
it's not
yeah,
hard. The thing is, so if a child has ADHD, I mean, this is
yeah.
my perspective that I'm sharing. I know that the child is going to
Mhm.
have difficulty with paying attention, sitting at one place. And this usually happens, if you read the recent thing, it is because the linking up between the basal ganglia and basically the inhibitory and the excitatory centers of the brain are not, like in balance. So if I would work on, I would definitely use a lot of sensory integration as a frame of reference. I would also work on a lot of primitive reflexes, and I would also work on a little bit of auditory intervention also. So when I combine all of them, I have seen most kids with ADHD settle down, because it's ADHD is a fast, they improve at a much faster pace than other kids who have other diagnoses.
So you do sensory integration, auditory integration, and
Primitive
third,
reflexes, a lot of work
oh,
on
you work
primitive
integrating
reflexes.
primitively.
Yeah,
Okay.
because many a times earlier when I used to do only SI, it helped, but when I started integrating the primitive reflexes, I realized it was amazing. As I told you in that presentation, that it's like an onion. If you take it like circles, the innermost layer is withdrawal reflex, then there are primitive reflexes, and if these are present, they will not let the higher supporting postural lifelong reflexes to develop. And if they don't develop, the child would be all over the place.
Yeah.
And he will be able to cognitively work. Cognitively matlab ke na, when I like right now I'm wearing this around my neck. Okay, so when I had gone for my primitive reflex first class that I went for, I couldn't wear anything around my neck and all. I couldn't let my hair touch here, because I was having a lot of tactile issues. But then I thought that's how I am, that's how, we are wired. That's what I used to think. Then in that class, this teacher asked, anybody who wants to volunteer and come up? I said, yeah, I'll come. I was like, I'm all perfect. I have no problems. I'm like the best. That's how I went. And she's like, oh, you have this Moro reflex present. You also have this spinal gallon present. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what happens? And then I worked on myself. And this was in my mid 30s when I worked on. And I worked on my Moro reflex and integration. But before that, so what I'm trying to talk is about the ADHD bit of it. A child would know. So I would wear things around my neck when I had to go for weddings, and I would tell myself cognitively, Reena, it's okay, yaar, half an hour ke liye pen le. It's okay, half an hour. Then you remove it. It's okay. While you're eating, you remove it. Only on the, stage when you go for the for the photo, you wear it. And I used to tell that to myself. So what I'm trying to tell you is, physiologically, I was disorganized. Yeah. Cognitively, I was trying to train myself. It's okay. But if that stayed beyond a particular point, I used to feel breathless. I used to feel irritated. I used to feel, like I would get angry with my husband and like, "Arey, kya hai? Kitna lamba line hai?" And like, I would do all those kinds of things. And I realized it was because I was not feeling well within. But when I integrated, now if I wear anything, I don't have to use that cognitive strategy alone to tell myself ki it's okay. So what I'm trying to tell you is, kids would get better. They can rely on those cognitive strategies, but if they feel well within physiologically, and if their state is that of calm, they don't have the need to jump around and get distracted. ADHD is actually what? It's a hyper attuned state. Like I'm like, okay, what is that light? Or what is that sound? Or what was this? Or what was that? Or what was this? So imagine the state is that of fight flight. So till you calm them down, how would they, I'm sure you're aware. So there's this safe and unsafe thing. When a child is feeling unsafe, which means when the child is in a fight flight state, he won't learn and he wants to move around. He will want to move so that he can calm himself down. But if the child is in a state of safety and he feels calm, he wouldn't have to move. He's ready to learn. So that's about ADHD.
Yeah. And I mean, the same question about autism. What kind of, usually, what are the areas or what are the methodologies that you use when you work with children with autism?
Wow, that's my bolte na, that's my love. I love working with kids with autism simply because when I worked with motor milestone delay, I was not happy because you do little work and they improve, and I was like, oh, it's not challenging. ADHD, you do little bit of work, they improve. I'm like, oh, that's not challenging. With autism, they give you a good fight. They take a lot of time. Earlier it was like, I would try everything and it was not happening. So with autism, the major things that I've learned now is, one is I do a lot of work with the parent first, because when the child is stressed out, the parent gets stressed out, and then it becomes like a cycle. So the first step is to break the cycle. So that means if the child is stressed out, or if the child has any behavior, the parent has to stay calm. And that is one big thing that can be done. So that is one. Two, I work on a lot of primitive reflex integration, a lot of work there. I do a lot of sensory integration and if I do only primitive reflex integration, I've tried all this. I thought, okay, let me do only primitive reflex work. It doesn't help. If I do only sensory integration, it helps to an extent. But if I do the combination, and when I empower the parent and I make the parent feel well supported emotionally, and the parent feels supported, the child feels supported. So it's parent, SI, primitive reflex, a lot of auditory work, lot of it. I do a lot of therapeutic listening and, like a lot of that kind of work. So when I combine it all, huge changes, huge changes. So now, of course, there are some kids who have autism with other comorbid conditions. So there I'm still struggling when they have epilepsy along, or they have, like other medically, a lot of, mainly it's seizures that we are trying to work on. But if it is just autism, I am seeing a lot of success. And the main chunk that I didn't target earlier was the parent. And now I find, when the parent comes and says, oh, no, ma'am, he gets stressed out, I will work it out. But when they come, ma'am, he gets stressed out, ma'am, he does this, ma'am, he does that, I know, oh, I need to first work with her. Because if she comes to me or he comes to me and he say, okay, you know what, he did that, I did that, it helped. That's it. I know that half the battle is won.
One.
Because the child is always, always co-regulating. So if I want the child to self-regulate, he has to first learn to co-regulate with a person who's calm and centered.
Yeah.
So that's where the main chunk is. Yeah.
And they kind of pick up on the kind of vibrations that we also give. When we are anxious, we are sending away the same vibes to them, and they pick up. Anyway anxious, and it becomes double, triple.
I think that's how we humans are. Na? We're
Yeah.
constantly co-regulating. So if I start crying now, I mean, when I do the classes and if I'm doing even on Zoom, it works. Na? If you're crying, parents are crying. If you are laughing, everybody's laughing. So we are always co-regulating. Kids are doing it. At least as adults, we know that if I'm laughing, you will laugh up to a point and you'll be like, enough, yaar, aur nahi hasna hai. But with kids, you know, they are so much, they're just blindly co-regulating. If my mom laughs, I should laugh. If my dad is angry, I should be angry. You know, like, especially, you know, when parents come to me and they say, you know, my child is hitting a lot. What do I do about it? Many a times they've seen it from the parents, you know, the father was hitting or the mother was hitting. So usually the child is picking up behaviors. I'm not saying that every behavior they pick up. What I'm trying to tell you is they pick up on the energies. They're picking up on the non-verbal body language. That's very important. So that's big. Yeah. And you know, throughout the day, imagine they are with the parents, and throughout the day, it's not possible to be like that calm and centered.
No.
It's not possible.
No, we are humans too as parents. I mean, I have a 21-year-old son with autism, and I've been through my own journey with him. And I've learned, you know, whatever you speak absolutely makes sense, you know. He would pick up on the way I would behave. And then when I started managing my emotions, my behavior, my, you know, everything, then automatically it reflected on him as a child. And then he would, you know, as you said, co-regulate with me. And yeah, it helps a lot.
So the point that I'm trying to put across here is that if you're mindful, that's why I've called it as becoming
mindful parenting.
Yeah. So if you're mindful, that's okay. So once in a while, if you lose it and your child is also stressed out, it's okay. Just be compassionate towards yourself first. You know, otherwise parents become like, I did that. I shouldn't have done this. I did that. And they're not sleeping at night. You know, it's okay. Just be easy with yourself. Just be mindful, do whatever best you can, and you're always doing your best. You know, then some of the parents feel guilty. I should have done that earlier, but that time also you were doing your best, so it's okay. You know, it's fine.
Yeah, and actually that's what I tell my moms who come here to the center. You have about 1.5 hours. I will take care of your child. Go get yourself a cup of coffee. Go get a massage. Go get a facial. Whatever you want to do. We won't call you. If you're late, it's fine. Just text us. We'll babysit your child till you're coming back and doing. It's very hard for the mothers because there's no respite care available in our country, and usually helpers and drivers and all, but they're not trained, so they struggle a lot to get some break from, you know, caring their own child.
The other thing, I want to interrupt you. The other thing, what I tell parents also is the ones who get very hard on themselves, that I should have done this, I should have done that. I tell them, how old is your child? They say 2 years old. I said, you are just a 2-year-old parent. It's okay. You're still learning. So my son is 11. So I would just say I'm just an 11-year-old parent. It's okay to make mistakes. You know, it's fine. Yeah, that
absolutely. Yeah, we are actually, our parenting age is as old as our kids. So we are also learning.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
True. That's a very good point.
That's why you know, I see my mom so patient with my son because she is now a, you know, whatever age I am, that old parent.
Plus your child's age.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's where she's becoming patient because she was not like this with me as a child.
Yes. We have had these conversations with our mom too. Where was all this love hiding when we were growing up?
Because they were growing at that time, you know.
Yeah, I know. So one more last question about handwriting difficulties in children, especially with learning disabilities or ADHD. How do you address as an OT those issues?
So mostly earlier when I used to work on a lot of handwriting, fine motor stuff and all. Of late, I've stopped doing it. I don't do any fine motor work with any child. I just work on sensory integration because if the planning comes in place, if the, you know, motor planning is put in place well, if the organizing happens well, and if I've worked on the reflexes that are around my hand, writing just comes. It's just, it's nothing like a difficulty at all. you know.
That's what even I feel, I've been trained in this method called extra lesson, and my mentor has told me the same, that you don't need to make a child hold a pencil and make them write and write and make them cry when they're writing.
Yeah.
You just work on sensory integration, reflex integration. The rest should fall in place.
They do, huh? It always falls in place because see, our body is so amazing. It's really amazing. It's a magnificent what you say. It's the best technology that we have, rather, you know. So it's always self-organizing. Once the things are in place, it will work in the best way, you know. I tell parents that your children are like trees. So if trees, meaning if the root, the flowers and the fruits is attention, focus, concentration, sitting tolerance, if that is not there in place, somewhere the roots are not very strong. So instead of working on focus and all, I would work on the vestibular system, reflex integration, proprioceptive system, tactile system. Once I work on that, everything would come automatically, you know, that way. So that's how it is.
Do you also talk to your parents about nutrition? How important the food that they eat?
Yeah. It's very important. And there's another important thing that I forgot to mention in the talk is about the electromagnetic field around us, because that's very important. You know, we're constantly exposed to a lot
Yes,
of
that's true.
wireless routers around us and those mobile towers around us and the mobile data being on all the time. So that is important also, to be careful and mindful about that. And nutrition, yes. So when I work with the kids who come to us, and if I find that we've done everything and there's very slow sluggish growth, you know, it's not going the way we want it to, then we definitely tell them to meet up a nutritionist, because the gut and the brain are connected. If
Yes.
there are difficulties digesting food, or you know, if there is a difficulty with that, definitely there'll be, because you know, with some kids, when they've gone on a diet, there's like a this kind of a change in just a week. They start
Yeah.
talking, speaking. So diet is very important, very important. Yeah.
One last thing. Could you tell us about your book?
Oh wow, yeah. So my book, yeah, that's something. So my book is called Looking Beyond Labels, and
Okay.
I wanted that word because I wanted everyone to see kids beyond their labels. You know,
Mhm.
it's not that okay, it's autism or it's ADHD, or as a child I was labeled as stubborn, ziddi. That was my
Mhm.
word. Dheet, बहुत dheet hai. I hated it when people called me that way. You know, even now when relatives meet, बहुत ziddi hai Reena. And I hated the labels. And I feel if you give a child a label, you know, the child will become one. You know, like what I'm trying to convey is, if you say, oh, he's non-compliant, or he's not listening, or he's not like that, or he's not that way, I want to look beyond that, and I want to see that their brain is different, it's processing things differently, and so they're doing things differently.
Mhm.
And if that is how the brain is, what is it that I can do by becoming a mindful parent to
Mhm.
support so that it can do the best there? If we see people like Temple Grandin, you know, she has a different brain, it's a neurodiverse brain, but she's doing so well for herself. So if you see Stephen Shore, he's doing so well for himself. So there are so many people who were differently wired, but when you give that a proper condition, a proper what you call environment, they flourish there, they thrive, you know. So that's what my book is about. My book, the first half of it, big chunk, is about how to work on ourselves as parents, because how we, you know, like a lot of work that I did on myself was a lot of erasing that I was doing of my childhood. You know, a lot of beliefs that I carried about myself, which I didn't need them. I was limiting myself. And I saw that that is what most parents are doing to their kids. So it's a lot about how to work on ourselves first.
Yes.
The other half is about occupational therapy, is about sensory integration, it's about primitive reflexes, it's about diet, it's about a lot of other things which I do and how it works together. It's a lot of how thoughts affect our kids and how they affect ourselves. So it's my kya bolenge, it's the juice of my 20 years that I've put in my book. You know.
I was, I mean, I just told a parent to get your book, and my copy is on its way. So I'm just hoping that, to learn a lot from your book and probably do a session with parents, chapter by chapter based on your book. Probably I'll invite you as a master for our master class to listen from.
Wow,
You are
that'll be an honor. That'll be an honor. But I mean, I would like to confess, because nowadays my son is watching my interviews also, that I'm not a very good. I mean, I am a mindful parent, but I have my moments and I allow myself to have them, and I'm okay with it. So, because he's like, oh, he wanted to sit here and listen to what I was talking. And then he would be like, oh, you told me I am your guru, but you're not doing what you should be doing. So there's a master. And I believe that all our kids are like our gurus in our house.
Yes.
They're helping us evolve. It may sound a little spiritual, but I feel we are on this earth for a reason, for a purpose. And we are all in each other's lives for a reason. And our kids are in our lives for a reason. And we just have to evolve. That's all that the purpose of life is.
Absolutely.
And to have that experience, that fulfilling experience, that it could be a smallest of thing. Like, if a parent tells me, oh, my child did potty in the pot today, oh, my child tasted something into his mouth today, that's an experience, even a little one, but that's what we
Enjoying
have.
the small achievements,
Exactly.
tiny achievements.
Exactly. And telling yourself, oh, not just the child, but to yourself that, we did it together.
Yeah, celebrate those things.
Yeah.
So
And
thank you so much. Yeah.
sorry, I want to end it with one thing. I
Just
mean, in my
please,
book, I have
please.
written this because it's very important. In my earlier years, when I was working as an occupational therapist, I saw that some of my kids were not improving. Some were improving very fast. Some were improving at an okay pace.
Yeah.
So I was like, like I wanted, he should improve fast. He should improve fast. And in those days, my dad was there. I mean, now he's passed away. But then I told him, Daddy, everybody is not improving that fast, What do I do? He said, Reena, have you seen a well? And have you seen the rope? I said, what are you telling me? I'm talking about kids, Daddy. He said, listen to me. He said, when you draw a water from a well, the rope has the power to leave an impression on the well, even if the well is like a rock, because of its consistency. And he said, if you are consistent, things will happen, but do not wait for them. You do your best. That's all. So that's another important thing, because many parents tell me, ये भी क्या, अब क्या होगा, अब कितना time लगेगा, कैसे होगा. I'm not saying that we don't wait for results. What I'm only saying is, do your best. Things will happen, when they are meant to happen, not when you want them to happen.
Yes,
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Reena. It was very insightful talk. I'll keep in touch with you. Maybe we should do a little thing on our website to for parents to know that you have a book.
Sure.
And we would like to get back to you and see how to collaborate on that, because I think all parents should read your book.
Yeah, I also want them to read. Yeah, I want them to read, and I want them to come and tell me, you know what? I know my child has issues or challenges, but it's okay. We are going to work on them. I want them to come with that spirit,
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, therapy, when I tell parents that we have to grow along with our child and we need to evolve, as you said, along with your child, some parents might feel a little worried ki, oh, I came to take help from me and then she's asking me to work on myself. So, I mean, that's not our intention, right? Our intention is if you are at a certain level, your child also will be able to grow, with you. So I don't know, I'm not able to word it properly, but as you said, it's a joint, it's a collaboration between you and your child. It's not just the child who needs fixing. In many times it's like
I'll tell you something. When my son was born, that time I was like 9 years of occupational therapy experience, and I was like on the top of the world. I know everything. I can fix any behaviors. I can do everything. And then my child was born, and he was the best child, very, very compliant and everything. And then suddenly at 2 years, he became a devil, he was like not listening, not sitting in the class, not following instructions. He would hit other kids. He would walk out of the class and say, it's so boring. And I was like, Baba Re, here I'm sitting with parents, teaching them what to do. And then I get a call from my child's school, ki, Are, your child is not sitting. I'm like, what's happening? But it was a big lesson. And I took my child to a developmental pediatrician thinking, just give him a label, he has a difficulty and I want to fix him. And the pediatrician said, you know what, your child is very sensitive. And I think you need to work on your anxiety, which means I had to work on my anxiety. I was so angry with that pediatrician. I was like, you just give him a label and tell me that he has a problem and I'm fine. But, that is how any relationship is. It is a two-way thing, you know. It
It's a
can't
two-way.
be that, yeah, it can't be that fix my child, he is a problem. You know, it is both ways. I have to be calmer, then my child is going to be calmer. And most important is I have an adult brain. My child is having a baby brain. His brain is developing. So it's never about fixing something. It's about, I think I see it as an evolving together. It's a journey of evolution. Yeah, that's what I see it as.
So on that note, let's end the conversation. And it was wonderful talking to you, Reena.
Same here,
And
same here.
even though it was our first conversation, and I think I'm going to come back to you because we talk such similar language. And I feel so, so comfortable talking to you,
Same
Thank
here.
you so much once again. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye.